They say the river keeps what it's owed. Every ripple, every secret, every soul that's ever slipped beneath its skin, it holds them tight, like stories whispered through mud and current. And if you've ever stood near moving water at dusk and felt that cold shiver crawl up your spine, you already know how this kind of story ends. But before it gets there, if you believe, like I do, that not everything lost stays gone, then go on and like, subscribe, or share this tale. Not for fame, but so you'll remember it when the river comes calling. It began on a Sunday when the heat shimmered above the plains like ghost fire. Cicadas screamed from the mesquite, the air heavy enough to chew. The Dunn Ranch lay stretched thin against the sky, flat land, dry fences, and the slow curve of the Trinity River marking its edge. I'd been out riding fence for McCready, just another day earning $1 that didn't stretch far enough. From my saddle, I could see dust rising near the laundry line, Sarah Dunn hanging sheets, her little boy Eli darting through the tall grass like a jackrabbit. I remember thinking how bright his red shirt looked against the gold of the field. Then came the scream. It wasn't just sound. It was terror made solid, sharp enough to slice through wind. Sarah's voice carried all the way across the pasture, and when I looked again, Eli was gone. The dog he'd been chasing barked at the riverbank, pacing. That was all it took. Instinct more than thought. I kicked my horse and rode hard, the world narrowing to dust, hoofbeats, and dread. The Trinity had always been fickle, lazy one day, lethal the next. Last night's storm had turned it restless, swollen, and wild. By the time I reached the bank, the river was boiling with brown water, branches, and foam. Then I saw him, a flicker of red spinning mid-current, his small arms thrashing before vanishing again. There's no time to think when death is close enough to smell. I dropped the reins, kicked off my boots, and dove. The cold hit like a fist, knocking the breath out of me. The current grabbed hold, dragging me sideways, twisting me end over end. I fought to keep my head up, scanning the surface for any sign of the boy. Then, there, a flash beneath the water. I dove again, eyes burning, lungs screaming. My hand brushed fabric, missed, then caught hold of something solid. The river pulled hard, like it wanted us both, but I wasn't letting go. Not again. I locked my arm around him and kicked, the weight of him dragging me deeper. For a heartbeat, the world went quiet. No sound but the roar inside my own head. Then, like breaking through glass, we surfaced. Air tore into my chest in ragged gulps. The boy was limp, face pale, water spilling from his lips. I could hear Sarah crying somewhere, her voice echoing across the current. I started for shore, every kick a battle. My body ached, arms trembling, but finally my boots struck gravel. I dragged us up the bank and laid the boy down on the mud. Sarah collapsed beside him, her hands fluttering helplessly. Please, please, she kept saying, her voice shaking like the wind before a storm. I leaned close, no breath. His small chest was still, and for a second, the world tilted. I'd been here before, years back, when another boy had gone under and never come up again. That guilt had haunted me, the kind that doesn't wash off no matter how hard you scrub. Not this time. I tilted Eli's head back, pinched his nose, and gave him air. Then I pressed down on his chest, counting under my breath, willing the river not to win. Sarah's sobs broke rhythm with my heartbeat. One more breath. 2. 3. Then he jerked. A cough. A choking cry. Water poured out of him, and suddenly he was breathing, gasping, alive. Sarah let out a sound I'll never forget, half scream, half prayer. She gathered him into her arms, rocking him like she could keep his heart beating through sheer will. Eli's eyes fluttered open, confused, and his small fingers reached for me. His hand was cold, but his grip was strong enough to anchor me. When I stood, my legs nearly gave out. The current had torn a gash along my arm, and blood mixed with river mud down my wrist. I looked back at the water. It was calm again, smooth and dark, pretending innocence. But I knew better. The river hadn't forgiven me. It had just spared me, like it was saving its appetite for later. Sarah thanked me between sobs, her words tumbling over themselves. I barely heard her. All I could think about was how the boy's small hand had felt in mine, how the current had almost won again. I wanted to say something, anything, but words don't fix what water breaks. So I just nodded, picked up my boots, and walked away barefoot through the tall grass. By the time the doctor's wagon reached the Dunn place, I was already halfway to the next county. Folks would talk, sure, they always do. Some said the cowboy came out of nowhere. Others swore they'd seen me at the river before the storm even started. Doesn't matter what they believed. The only truth that mattered was this. The river had given something back, but it never gives for free. As I rode west into the sinking sun, the wind carried the faint hiss of running water behind me. I could have sworn I heard it whisper my name, soft, patient, promising it would see me again. Because the river doesn't forget. It just waits. I didn't plan on coming back to the Dunn Ranch, but the river has its own way of calling a man home. 2 weeks after the rescue, I found myself riding that same road again, the air heavy with the smell of wet earth and cedar. The Trinity was calmer now, still swollen from the storm, but slow, secretive, like it had something to hide. I told myself I was just passing through, looking for work down by the southern range. But the truth was simpler and harder. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd left something unfinished on that muddy bank. When I crested the last hill, I saw Sarah hanging laundry again, the same white sheets rippling in the wind like flags of surrender. Eli sat nearby, tossing stones into a metal bucket, his laughter bright and alive. For a second, I almost turned my horse around. Some debts are better left unpaid, but then she looked up and saw me. "Mr. Weaver," she called. Her voice carried less fear now, more curiosity than caution. "Didn't think I'd see you again. Didn't think I'd come back," I admitted, dismounting. My boots sank into the soft earth. The smell of the river hung in the air, even from here. Thick, metallic, alive. She poured me a cup of coffee from a tin pot and handed it over, her fingers brushing mine. Her hands were rough from work, but warm. "You saved my boy," she said quietly. "Least I can do is offer a drink." Eli wandered over, his red shirt faded now, bare feet streaked with dust. "Mama says you pulled me out of the water." He looked up at me with that open, curious gaze only children have. "Were you scared?" I wanted to lie. Tell him no. Tell him men like me didn't fear rivers or ghosts or the things that live between them. But the words wouldn't come. "Yeah," I said. "Scared plenty." Sarah smiled at that, small, knowing. "He doesn't remember much," she said. "Doctor says that's a blessing." Maybe so, but I remembered everything. The pull of the current, the weight of the boy, the voice in the back of my skull whispering again. We talked a while about the weather, the cattle, the coming harvest. But underneath it all, the air between us felt taut, strung with something unspoken. Finally, she asked what had been sitting on her tongue since I'd shown up. "Why'd you disappear like that?" I stared past her, toward the slow bend of the river. "Because I'd failed once before." She didn't say anything, just waited. So I told her about the cattle drive down near Amarillo years back. About the other boy, Tommy, 14, green as spring grass, who'd fallen during a crossing. How I'd hesitated for half a heartbeat, frozen by the shock of the cold, and by the time I'd moved, the river had taken him. His face still surfaced sometimes when I slept, pale and wide-eyed, spinning beneath the current. That's what had pushed me in after Eli before my mind could argue otherwise. Sarah's eyes softened, but she didn't offer comfort, and I didn't want it. Some burdens are meant to be carried alone. "The river's not something you beat," I said after a while. "You just get lucky." She shook her head. "You didn't get lucky. You made a choice." I thought about that for a long moment. Maybe she was right. Or maybe the river had simply chosen not to collect that day. Before I left, Eli pressed something into my hand. A small river stone, smooth and cool. "For good luck," he said. "So you don't get scared next time." I closed my fingers around it. The boy smiled, then ran off, barefoot in the grass. Sarah stood watching him, her face caught between gratitude and something else, something quieter. "He asks about you," she said. "Says the cowboy with the scar is his hero." I nodded, tucking the stone into my coat pocket. "Tell him heroes don't bleed so easy." The wind picked up, rippling the laundry, carrying with it that low, familiar whisper from the riverbank. I turned toward the sound, and for just a heartbeat, I thought I saw something move beneath the surface, a shimmer, a pale shape turning slow in the dark water. When I looked again, it was gone. I mounted up, tipping my hat. "Keep him away from the river," I said. Sarah's eyes followed me as I rode off. "You too, Mr. Weaver," she called softly. "Keep yourself away from it." I didn't answer. Some men are meant to stay clear of deep water. Others are born owing it something. And I reckon the Trinity hasn't finished tallying my debt just yet. Because as I rode past the bend, the wind carried a sound that wasn't quite water, wasn't quite memory. A child's laugh, sharp and fleeting, echoing just below the surface. And I swear to God, it wasn't Eli's. The rains came early that spring, heavy enough to wake the river from its winter sleep. By the third day, the Trinity had swollen past its banks, curling around the valley like a restless animal. I'd promised myself I'd stay away, but promises don't mean much when the river decides it wants your attention. Its voice carried even miles from camp, low, steady, whispering my name through the trees. When I reached the Dunn Ranch, the sky was a bruised gray, the air thick with rain and mud. Water crawled across the pastures, swallowing fences and turning the fields into mirrors of the storm above. Sarah and Eli were outside, fighting to pile sandbags along the porch. The boy looked older somehow, but still small against that wide, angry sky. "You need to get inside," I shouted, sliding from my saddle. Sarah's hair clung to her face. "The calves are trapped by the fence. If we don't get them out now, they'll drown." The fence line was half gone already, just a jagged line vanishing into the flood. I didn't argue. I grabbed a rope from the saddle and waded in. The current bit hard, fast, cold enough to steal the air from my lungs. It was like wrestling with something alive. I reached the trapped calves, cutting them loose one by one, driving them toward the rise where the land still held firm. But over the wind, I caught another sound, a child's cry. Thin, sharp, carried on the rain. I turned. Eli. He'd wandered from the porch, drawn by the noise, the chaos, maybe even the river itself. He was halfway to the water, clutching at a floating trough that spun like a leaf. One wrong step, and he was gone. I don't remember running, only the sound of my heartbeat and Sarah's scream somewhere behind me. I dove again, the water closing over me like a mouth. For a moment I saw nothing, only brown churn and lightless motion. And then there he was, a flash of red against the current. I caught him, pulled him close, and kicked for the bank. The current fought like it wanted him back. My legs burned, lungs seared, but I held on. When my knees finally struck mud, I dragged him onto the grass, both of us gasping, half drowned. Sarah fell beside us, wrapping Eli in her arms. The boy coughed, breathing ragged but real. She looked at me through tears and rain. "You saved him again." I shook my head, too tired to speak. The water hissed nearby, sliding back into its channel, pretending calm. When the storm finally broke, the sun slipped through the clouds, pale and quiet. Steam rose from the flooded ground, the smell of wet earth thick in the air. Sarah stood beside me, watching the river retreat. "Maybe now it's finished," she said softly. "Maybe," I said. "But the river doesn't finish things. It just waits." Eli came running toward us then, barefoot and smiling, holding out something in his small hand, the river stone he'd once given me. "You forgot this," he said. I closed his hand around it again. "Keep it," I told him. "It's yours now." As I rode out later that day, the land glistened under the clearing sky, and the river shimmered behind me like nothing had ever happened. But I knew better. The Trinity had its stories, and now, so did I. Some debts can't be repaid. Some are forgiven only by surviving them.